This is The Road Ahead, Chapter 9. Can they fix it? The author has no clue. Before we get started, I do advise you to check the content warnings in the description, as this one can get quite exciting. Thank you very much, and now we shall continue on with our story. Janice remembered falling. He remembered the spread of electricity across his skin, crackling with a blinding light. He remembered screaming. Some of it had been his own, but the rest, his eyes had fluttered shut too quickly. Now, as he awoke, the room was dark. The absence of light, though nice in the fact that he was not blinded upon opening his eyes, did nothing to soothe the pounding in his head. He lifted his head from where it had drooped in front of his chest. A dull ache surfaced, and Janice bit his cheek to keep from wincing at the pain. Leather straps pinned his wrists to the arms of the chair. A welcome gift, courtesy of Tetracorp itself. Janice didn't have to look to know the skin had been rubbed raw from the material. They had been pinched unnecessarily tight and were restricting a fair amount of blood flow. Janice squinted through the shadows and locked onto the few sources of light he had. A monitor that glowed in the far corner of the room, a lamp shining in his peripherals, and a gleam of metal that resembled a second chair. Empty. He struggled to push through the fog in his mind. All before he had fallen unconscious, his world had been filled with a swarm of black jumpsuits and dark-soled boots. He cringed at the memory of electricity flowing through his veins, searing his nerves. If anything, Janice just hoped the others had gotten out safe. A click sounded before the door latch slid open. Company, though not the kind anyone would wish for. It was uncertain whether the woman who walked through the doorway could even be considered human. Her angled face reminded Janice of a shark, with eyes an icy blue and a blood-red smile that could leave any of the bravest fighters cowering. Dr. Robin Kernos was a woman of observation. Behind her wire spectacles, her eyes trailed back and forth, and her lips curled into a grin when she took in Janice's battered form. She was tall, sporting a long white lab coat that concealed the black dress beneath. Short dark curls framed her face, pulled into tight ringlets aside from the few that cascaded just over her forehead. Top scientist of Tetracorp. Some may even say the head of it all. Janice didn't doubt it. Good evening. Her voice was eerily level. Had a nice rest, have we? Janice's eyes narrowed, but he did not speak. His unease had been concealed beneath a cold expression. Shoulders tensed, jaw clenched. Still not much for talking. Her hand flew to the clipboard tucked under her shoulder where she retrieved a secondary key card. She swiped the card through the side of the monitor, which flickered to life. No need to worry. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to chat by the end of the night. For now, I figured we could indulge in a little video. 4 boxes emerged on the screen. All of them remained trained on the area surrounding the front door, each providing a slightly different perspective. Janice recognized it even before 6 figures rushed into the shot. There was no sound as the scene played out, leaving the room eerily silent. Janice tried to ignore the way Dr. Kernos's gaze flicked back and forth between him and the screen. He didn't need her mockery. He just had to survive, and if that meant playing her game, then he would persist through it. The worst part, however, came when nearly everyone had crossed the threshold. Janice didn't need any sound to feel each moment fleeting through his fingers. It seemed to replay in slow motion. He could feel the pounding of his heart, the brush of his fingers against cool outside air. And my favorite part of the show, Dr. Kernos grinned, the moment where our great hero falls. Janice watched himself be enveloped in the blast of thousands of volts. His knuckles were white as he gripped the arms of the chair. The resulting ache was still present in his nerves, and he dared to shut his eyes if only to avoid facing his own failure. Robin had other ideas. Not yet. She gripped Janice's chin, forcing his gaze up to face the screen. You'll miss the best part. Monster, Janice spat through gritted teeth. He jerked away from her touch, but the words were stolen from his tongue with what appeared on the screen next. His form remained crumpled on the floor. That was how he remembered it, after all, though another figure appeared into view. From their side, they retrieved a blade and charged into the crowd with reckless abandon. Janice strained forward to catch a sight of the figure that had managed to disarm several of the guards that filled the screen. He watched as the defenses fell, and a spatter of red dotted one of the cameras. Only as another black jumpsuit tumbled to the ground did Janice catch sight of their face. Roman. He watched his partner tear through the crowd, his mouth forming Janice's name as he called out. Dr. Kernos's hand fell onto his shoulder as the scene unfolded, though Janice was only trained on the man who had managed to keep back nearly half of the security force. All too soon, Janice saw Roman's movements slow. The lines became too overwhelming, and though the determined spark never faded from his eyes, Roman fell into the grasp of their enemy. Janice longed to call out as he caught the glint of a needle, though there was no use. It was a recorded track, and as he watched past Roman sink to the floor, it was already too late. The screen flickered black, and Janice was left alone with Robin's cruel smile. He's quite the determined one. I find that's what makes your downfall all the more beautiful. She pressed a button which rewound the tape until it froze on a single image. Roman, arm outstretched with the blade Janice had given him. His eyes were alight, fury coursing through his veins even as the image remained still. Dr. Kernos pressed another button, and the picture vanished just as quick as it had appeared. I must say, I didn't think you would ever venture outside solitude. You were always quite the loner, though this one is a welcome addition. An extra bonus, I like to think. Janice didn't meet her eyes. He kept his gaze trailed on the tile floors, counting them as the silence grew. 1, 2, 3. He didn't need this. This wasn't what was supposed to happen, and he couldn't give in now. His fingernails pressed tight into his palm, enough to draw blood if Robin hadn't stopped him. Come now, don't be so despondent. Her skin was cold as she pried his fingers apart. She shot him a sly smile, her own nails pricking his skin as she forced his fist open. Your little friend is just a door away, and I'm sure he'd be happy to visit. Leave him out of this. Oh, but where's the fun in that? Dr. Kernos hummed. She retrieved a small communication device from the pocket of her lab coat and turned the knob until the room was filled with radio static. Bring him inside. In an almost instantaneous response, the door latch slid open, and through it came 3 black uniforms, only 2 of which were real. Roman stumbled forward with a guard flanked on both sides of him. Janice struggled to recognize the man before him. No charming smile nor witty expression. A dark bruise had formed on his temple, and a crimson gash ran across his cheek. The shoulder of his stolen uniform had been torn, where someone's blade had surely landed. Not so much as a bandage had been applied to aid his wounds. Yet still, he fought. You sick murderers, he shouted. You're nothing but villains. Roman thrashed in the guard's hold, shouting obscenities until he was forced into the seat adjacent to Janice. He was strapped to the chair with the same restraints that bound Janice's wrists, and only as he was trapped did the 2 lock eyes, Roman fell still almost instantly. Janice. The name fell from his tongue, and he took in his partner's battered form in the same way Janice had observed his injuries. He strained forward as if to say more, but was cut off by Dr. Kernos. How sweet. You gave yourself a name? Her eyes bore into Janice, slashing through his every defense as if it had been paper. You always were the defiant type, weren't you? Don't, Janice hissed. I quite missed this banter, 72. Or, I suppose you wish to be called Janice now. I can adjust. Robin punctuated the name with a cruel grin. Janice couldn't help but squirm beneath her gaze. She knew what she was doing, creating the wound only to twist the knife deeper. What is she playing at? Roman's eyes were wide with questions. He searched Janice for any sort of an answer. Still so naive, he didn't yet understand that everything had a deeper story. It's nothing, Janice grit through his teeth. Ah, yes, nothing at all. Only Janice. Dr. Kernos circled his chair, her sharp stilettos clicking on the floor with every step. Who would ever believe your great leader had a history? Janice. Roman pressed forward as far as the restraints would let him. Janice tore his gaze away. Don't. Oh, come on. We can't deprive your precious partner of the truth. Leaving others in the dark like that just isn't fair, though. Once a liar, always a liar, I suppose. She ran her nails across the back of Janice's chair, tearing a shrill screech from the metal. Come now, let us show him together. Her hand flew to his face, gripping his chin before Janice could jerk away. No! Janice struggled in her grip, pulling against the restraints as her nails left marks in his skin like talons. He tried to turn away, but she only held tighter. Her fingers swept over his skin, leaving cruel trails in their wake. Dr. Kernos finally broke away with a grin on her face. Janice dropped his head, determined to hide what she had done. The horrid, horrid truth. It was useless. She held up a hand, and on it was a light residue, the same coloring of Janice's skin. Roman recognized the product almost immediately. Foundation. Dr. Kernos trapped Janice's chin between her thumb and forefinger, and as she lifted his head, Roman finally understood. As if a curtain had been lifted, he suddenly recognized the chestnut hair that was matched with pale skin, the way his hair curled slightly at the edges. Roman saw the torn photo, its match right in front of him, all up to the reddened mark that covered one side of his face. Burned. Experiment 72. It's you, Roman breathed. Janice looked away and the reddened scar followed. Dr. Kernos, however, began to chuckle. So fun when stories are shared, especially one of my favorites. She tousled Janice's hair, and he cringed away from the touch. The boy who got away. Well, not anymore. Screw you, Janice sneered. His eyes narrowed as he attempted to hold himself together. It was all a game, a wretched, immoral game that Janice wouldn't lose if he could do anything about it. Robin hissed. Don't blame me for your own failures. Thank me instead, for now we can be on with the pleasantries and get to the real business. Dr. Kernos returned to the monitor and with a grin reached into her pocket. From it she retrieved a small device, the flash drive. A click, and the flash drive was inserted into a port on the side of the monitor. The screen flashed white for a moment before a small box appeared on the glass. Roman strained to read the words that emerged on the screen. Access denied. You thought to steal my data, then keep me from it? Dr. Kiernos chuckled. I must commend you for the act, but for such things to take effect, you actually have to make it out of the facility. And yet a special scientist like yourself can't crack the code. Janice bit back with narrowed eyes. Oh, darling, and that's why you're here. Janice cringed at the name, though Kiernos's grin only widened. She strolled to his chair and traced a finger across his shoulders, punctuating each word with a tap. Give me the access code, and all our problems can dissolve. Bold of you to think I'd ever help your schemes. Bold of you to forget there are greater things at stake. The hand on Janice's shoulder shifted to his head, and he was jerked to face a small cart that had been rolled into the room. On it was an assortment of instruments, all of them enough to make Janice's blood run cold. After all, I would hate to have to resort to other methods. He watched as Dr. Kiernos crossed the room. She brushed her fingers over several of the items, almost contemplating, before selecting something that resembled a shortened staff. When flicked on, the end crackled to life. So, what will it be? Her hands tightened round the weapon in anticipation. I'll die before I'll ever help you, Janice spat. Robin shook her head with a sigh. Wrong answer. She raised the stick, and Janice braced himself for the impact. It never came. Instead, crackling down in thousands of volts, the weapon struck Roman's side. He cried out, doubling over as electricity skittered over his form. Nerves fried, he struggled to raise his head with ragged breaths. Again, tell me the code. Janice's eyes darted between Roman and the weapon. His mind was racing, heart pounding just as fast. The words wouldn't form on his tongue. Speak up. Again, Roman was hit with the weapon. This time he screamed, straining against his restraints as he tried to escape the electricity that seared his skin. Janice couldn't bear to watch. Stop it. Not until you talk. Don't forget you're in control of this, Janice. The name was sour on her tongue. Your little friend's life is in your hands. No, Janice bit out. Leave him out of this. Too late. Dr. Kiernos swung the weapon again, catching Roman in the ribs. He trembled beneath its effects, throat raw as he couldn't help but scream. Roman clenched his teeth, struggling to remain conscious. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Don't tell her anything, Roman managed to choke out. His eyelids drooped as he spoke, words slurring. I'm all right. Janice clenched his fist till the knuckles turned white. Stop this now. Oh, but you'd do anything for him, wouldn't you? A feline smile emerged on Dr. Kiernos' lips. She pressed the stick to Roman's collarbone, tearing a broken gasp from his lungs. Janice pulled against his restraints if only to reach for him. Come on, just a simple code. We can end this right now. Don't help her, Roman coughed. His head hung, yet he still managed to keep the fire in his eyes. I'm fine. Dr. Kiernos sighed, shaking her head with mock disappointment. So valiant. It seems this just won't be enough. The staff-like weapon fell onto the cart with a dull thud, and relief flooded Janice's senses. All until her fingers fell upon a syringe instead. The chamber had been filled with a green liquid, and the needle glinted in the lamplight. Janice didn't need Robin's explanation to know what it was. beautiful, isn't it? I'm sure your pretty friend would love to try our newest prototype. Janice blanched. No. You know I'm not one for bluffing. The code, or I inject him with the serum. The words were stolen from Janice's tongue. He opened his mouth to say something, though all that came out was a shaky breath. Dr. Keranos' smile only grew. Her black stilettos clacked across the tiles as she approached Roman. He didn't even lift his head. He was trapped on the edge of consciousness. The needle grew dangerously close to his neck, so much that Janice caught its gentle glow as it swirled in the syringe. Too close, an inch away from piercing his skin. "All right!" Janice screamed. His skin rubbed raw from pulling against the leather straps. "Ask me your questions, and I'll answer. Just don't hurt him." He hung his head. Check and mate. Janice had lost the game. And yet, Robin still clapped. She strolled up to Janice, gripping his jaw with icy fingers. "Very good. I always knew you had it in you." Her nails were like talons, and Janice felt them prick his skin as she only held tighter. He didn't meet her eyes. "You wanted the code, right?" "Yes. Such a good listener you are." Janice pushed away the last comment, glancing past the scientist to catch a glimpse of Roman. His shoulders trembled, and though his head had fallen to his chest, Roman was still breathing. At least that hadn't been taken. He began listing off the code, not sparing any numeral nor symbol. Dr. Keranos typed everything into the search bar, and as she entered the final numeral, the screen flashed green. Every record returned to the screen, mocking Janice with the endless source of knowledge he had almost taken. When the files had returned, she spun on her heel, flashing one more crooked grin before pulling at the silver door. "It's been fun, boys." Dr. Keranos waved, her eyes locking with Janice. "You've been such a great help. I must thank you dearly for your service to our company." She cackled, and the door slammed shut. Shortly after, the latch clicked into place. There, as Janice sat, the room was again silent. Aside from Roman's shallow breaths, he was left utterly alone. "Prince," Roman only groaned. For all Janice knew, he wasn't taking in a word he said. Hadn't since the electricity coursed through his already battered body. Janice sighed, his eyes stinging with something that could only be tears. No. Janice refused to cry, refused to give Tetracorp the satisfaction of anything else ever again. He looked past Roman and at his reflection in the silver door. A man he hadn't seen in years stared back. Janice thought such a person had died the moment he ran, but the past was inescapable. Janice sighed. "I can't decide if you coming back for me was brave or stupid," he muttered to Roman's unconscious form. Small burns slittered every place the weapon had touched. Hopefully they wouldn't scar. "I'm leaning towards stupid, but only because you didn't deserve this. I'll fix this. Somehow." Janice thought two words in his head he refused to say out loud, not when he couldn't trust himself to fulfill it. But as his eyes fell onto Roman, he hoped with everything he could utter them one day. "I promise." This has been Chapter 9 of The Road Ahead. Thank you so very much for listening, and I will see you next time for Chapter 10.